So Blake, with all the TikTok hoo-ha over in the US, we've seen, and you would have been familiar with the kind of rise of some of these TikTok upstart apps that kind of look and feel like the great Chinese origin. And one of them that's been advertised to me incessantly on various platforms is Deep Stash, which kind of badges itself as a intellectual TikTok, if ever there's such a thing. Gives you quotes from books and, tidbits that you can make you pretend like you've actually read the original source. And I downloaded it and I started signing up. And one of the prompts on the onboarding journey as I entered my details was, what's your main focus here? And so I thought that was a great way for you to introduce yourself to Ctrl-Alt-Speech listeners today. What's your main focus here?
My focus is on creator governance. Basically, how content creators, influencers, live streamers, and their communities of fans, supporters, haters shape the experiences that we have on digital platforms and also the platforms themselves. What kind of role can they play in making our information environment better, worse, and something we haven't figured out yet.
Amazing. I mean, that's almost entirely why you're here today. I'm very, very glad to have you on the podcast. My main focus today, as kind of the person in the chair of the podcast today, is to just play Mike. I'm going to play Mike. I'm going to talk a bit about Section 230. I'm going to flag up great articles on TechDirt. I'm going to make sure that he comes back and feels like he's been represented on the podcast in his absence. So
I feel like you should insert the meme sound of an eagle crying out its freedom.
Exactly that. He'll be very pleased with that. Hello and welcome to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, your weekly roundup of the major stories about online speech, content moderation, and internet regulation. It's February the 12th, 2026, and this week we're talking about platform product changes to get ahead of regulation that calls for platform product changes, and the holes in both Claude's constitution and Meta's political ad policy. My name is Ben Whitelaw. I'm the founder and editor of Everything Moderation, and this week Mike is away. I'm not entirely sure where, but I'm very lucky to be joined by Dr Blake Hallinan, Professor of Platform Studies in the Department of Media and Journalism Studies at Aarhus University in Denmark. Welcome, Blake. How are you doing?
I am doing great. I'm very happy to be here.
Excellent. You sound like you're not entirely sure. Are you?
No, I think I just have the same kind of stereotypical response that I hear a lot of other guests on podcasts go, like long-time listener, first-time caller, like harkening back to the talk radio days. And I'm feeling that right now because I am a long-time listener and first-time joining.
Well, very, very glad to hear both of those things. I've read your work at length over the last few years since I've been writing Everything in Moderation. Your research has kind of cropped up in the work that I've done. And I've always wanted to have the chance to kind of talk to you a bit about it. So having you on the podcast today is a fantastic thing for me as well. Before we dive into today's stories, I want to talk a bit about that work because it's incredibly varied and rich and super interesting. You've looked at a whole range of topics, including kind of typologies of social media rituals and the nature of kind of authenticity on Instagram. And a piece of research I really enjoyed was the value inherent in social media platform policies, looking at what you can discern from how platforms write their platform policies. And I wanted to kind of ask you a bit about that last piece of research. Like, how did you come to look at what are ostensibly very boring, quite dry documents, and what did you learn about them?
Yeah, so there's a subfield of academic research concerned with infrastructure studies. And the lore that I hear about it is that came out of a group of people who describe themselves as the Society for the Boring. And, I wasn't part of that society, but spiritually, I feel like I belong there. But in terms of platform governance research, I think things like policy documents become really attractive sites to study because they're one of the few things that's available. And they have been this kind of public display to users, to regulators who might want to step in, to advertisers, to perform what is happening on platform, what its commitments are, how those look like in practice. And so, like lots of political scholarship concerned with constitutions, laws, these institutional documents, platform governance research also kind of gravitates towards them.
And you found some kind of commonalities between a lot of the platform policy documents, right? You looked at a handful of them and you found some shared kind of messaging.
Yeah. So it was definitely part of this comparative investigation. And I want to make sure I shout out my co-author and leader on this one, Rebecca Sharlock and Limor Schiffman. But we looked at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok. And we focused on the kind of main policies, privacy, terms of service, community guidelines. And we looked not just the details of what they were doing, but why they were justifying any particular suggestion, encouragement, ban that they had. And so we talked about these as values, and we're surprised with how similar they were across. So things like promoting expression, building community, protecting safety, providing choice, and constantly improving the experience of all of those things were these kind of really common refrains. And I think we see those values and terms really dominate public conversation and concern with social media now, not necessarily buying into the fact that platforms are accurately promoting them by any means, but that's kind of what's at stake here. It winds a conversation.
And did you kind of figure out or get to a sense of why there were such commonalities between them or where they originated? Was there any sense of that?
Yeah, so this particular study didn't look at the kind of historical orientation, but some of the work that we've done since then has approached this as part of the professionalization of trust and safety, where it moves from the one person who's at the company who, was coming out of the law focus to becoming a broader field that talks to each other, that circulates documents, that has online material to create a shared professional identity to help navigate all of these circumstances. And I think we see this professionalization reflected in all of the commonalities, that there is mostly, there's some consensus among social media platforms about what the kinds of things you need to adopt are, how you might go about addressing them, and the kind of common concerns there.
Yeah, and how they've changed, I guess, over time as well. One thing that I was particularly drawn to was your work on content creators. Part of my kind of day job is looking at how the media is shifting as a result of this rise in content creators who obviously kind of have a lot of sway online. They have a lot of followers, they have a lot of power. People are drawn to them for the way that they act and share experience. And you've looked at kind of how content creators engage with content moderation decisions, which I think is a fascinating topic. We've talked a bit about Dylan Page, the TikToker, News Daddy, his kind of aliases on TikTok, and how he has been engaging with this idea of being shadow banned / censored in recent weeks. What ways have you seen kind of creators engage in platform governance and in understanding what it means to be moderated or to kind of be at the behest of these platform policies? And how are you seeing that change over time?
Yeah, so the work that I've done has found kind of two main approaches for creators to participate in platform governance or content moderation. One strategy is horizontal, where creators are speaking to other creators as peers, as colleagues, as people operating in the same space, and creating norms about how they should or should not behave. So you see this around, particularly lately, but a hot topic in Denmark, but also maybe in the US as well, around gambling and financial advertisements. And should influencers take them on? And there's disagreement on it, but you get these efforts designed to kind of shape industry consensus. Similar to the professionalization of trust and safety, you have creators taking on that role, calling out what each other are doing, and trying to rally their audiences to encourage or promote particular types of behavior. The other main strategy is vertical, where you get creators kind of trying to reach upward towards the platform and shape what its policies are, how it's enforcing things, what features should it make available. And that's usually done by speaking out, by using the influence that they have and use for advertisements, for building community, directing that to pressure platforms in the way that journalism might do as well. And sometimes it's successful. It's easier to get particular decisions overturned. So, you can still get quite a lot of pressure on X. If you rally your audience, keep tagging at YouTube, at Twitch, at TikTok, maybe they'll reverse the ban or the strike or the particular decision. It's much harder to get structural changes, but people try. And it's also difficult to see, are those effective? Because you do get all of these policy changes over time that are shaped by many different factors, including creators. So it's likely that there is some influence there, but it's much more diffuse or indirect.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other route seemingly on Twitter is just to tag Elon Musk as often as you can. And, irrelevant of what you've been banned for, you may well be freed again one day. Super interesting. I think there's amazing learnings for our audience in the research you've done. I'm really glad to kind of have you on the podcast today to bring that to bear. So thanks for sharing a bit of that. And hopefully we'll dive into that as we go through the stories today. Before we go into the stories that we've selected today, Blake, I wanted to do a bit of admin. As we talked about at the top of the episode, I feel like if Mike was here, he would remind everyone that this week was the 30th anniversary of Section 230. And he has written, and some of his colleagues at TechDebt have written some great pieces on why this is a pivotal moment for the internet, why Section 230 still matters, and looking at some of the arguments around its repeal, potentially why it shouldn't be repealed, which I'm going to direct you towards. They'll be in the show notes, even though he is not there. That's what a loyal co-host does. A couple other things to know. We've got our Ctrl-Alt-Speech bingo up and running on our website. So if you are about to get settled and listen wherever you are, go to ctrlaltspeech.com/bingo. You can refresh your bingo card. You can get a host of regularly updated slots and play bingo as you go today. I already know that there are some things that Blake and I will be talking about, which are in the bingo card, which is exciting. Please do not play whilst you are driving, or if you are doing anything else that is dangerous. I'd hate for that to happen. Finally, we won't have Ctrl-Alt-Speech next week. Both Mike and I are away, but that doesn't mean you can't subscribe, follow us on all the major platforms. If you're a regular listener, please do take the time to review us and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. It's massively helpful for helping us get discovered and combat the ever-growing tranche of podcasts that are released and stand out from the crowd. So thank you to listeners who have done that already and continue to do so. Right then, Blake, let's get started. Not only was it the birthday anniversary of Section 230 this week, it was also Safer Internet Day, which feels a bit like Black Friday for platforms' safety initiatives. It's everyone's got a sale or is selling something. And, you were very interested in a couple of different platform responses this week.
Yeah, really a special day for press releases dealing with trust and safety. And, I think the one who has captured the most attention by far is Discord, who announced a new policy that'll be coming into place in March, what they're talking about as teen by default settings. So this is only new for some of Discord's users. It's already been in place in the UK and Australia, where there have been restrictions on teen use of social media. And they're rolling that out to the rest of their user base worldwide. So things that previously would have required or associated with not safe for work, that might be a particular channel in a server. It might be a whole server dedicated towards it. It might be other kind of features. If you want to do that now, they'll need to consider your account an adult.
Interesting. So this is a extension of age assurance technology, essentially, across a whole new set of markets. What do you think the implications of this will be in terms of the user base, or what reaction has there been so far?
Yeah, so there has definitely been protests, call-outs, complaints on X, on Blue Sky. I definitely heard about this via its repercussions on social media before I'd come across the press release or journalism coverage myself. And a little bit of efforts to mobilize people to boycott financially. So especially Discord users who had Nitro, their paid premium service, calling on users to cancel this. And a lot of the concerns here are not specific to Discord, but any of these policies around age verification, privacy, what is required for you to do so, how might that be misused?
And so this is almost like another example of, I'd rather botched, I would say, announcement around age verification and age assurance. As you say, there had to be a clarifying statement from Discord, which clarified that actually not everyone would have to input their age details or upload an ID in the way that was initially thought. And as you say, there's only for certain people who are accessing particular servers, particular channels. Where do you sit, Blake, on the kind of age assurance spectrum? It's a topic that's very controversial. Mike and I have talked about it at length. Just so kind of listeners understand, like when we talk about it as a way of keeping users safe, what comes to mind?
My main association with age verification is it creates a hurdle that clever teens learn to get around quickly. I might be projecting back onto my own childhood and many other peers that I'm talking with here. I think, my parents had probably AOL kid features back in the 90s. But, there's questions around their efficacy and how well they work to serve their purpose and the spillover effects that it has for other people. And I think in terms of privacy loss and information control, and there's promises here like this doesn't affect the majority of people. We don't have data about how much people are accessing NSF content on Discord already, or what percentage of their model, how it works, inferring existing users' ages, or even what service they're using. Because the clarification had all of these promises about keeping your photo or video, your video selfie on your device, deleting things quickly. It seemed like they were using the KID service, but when they look at users are reporting, at least on X, I think there was a viral tweet from its SOLF that was like, if we look at what's going on the UK version of it right now, the vendor they're using is Persona, which is associated with funding from Peter Thiel. So that made people significantly less optimistic about would they keep these promises around protecting your data.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that there was a link between Persona and Peter Thiel. That's very interesting. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? There was a host of stories as well that showed that there was creative individuals who'd created models, 3D models that allowed Discord users to essentially bypass the age verification system. There was a host of individuals who were boasting, I think probably fairly enough, that they'd used photos of their relatives, pets, whatever it might be, to get through the age assurance technology. And so again, we're in a familiar cycle of, I think, platform trying to respond to regulation in Europe and the UK, try to standardize their approach, alienating a bunch of users in the process, and then actually potentially not necessarily yielding the impact that they want. Do you think, Blake, that we're approaching a kind of age-tiered internet now? I mean, this idea of having age assurance as part of the kind of safety stack increasingly means that we're creating versions of the internet based upon how old we are or how old we think users are. What do you think the kind of downsides or problems are associated with that?
It's definitely easier for some people to verify than others. And, the two common ways that Discord promised are pretty industry standard. One, you submit identifications that get recognized, and one, you have access to your biometric data in terms of video, and that gets interpreted in particular ways. And some people look easier to their age than others. Some people are more willing to share or have access to identity documents. And I think there are definitely global inequalities about what documents get recognized, how they're issued, that happen. But I also think that there is this risk of determining what information people should have access to, how they should be able to express themselves. The concerns around the teen age restrictions in the UK and Australia and being talked much broader are, there are populations who access to these communities is transformational. It's really important to them. People who are alienated from their communities around them for political, ethnic, sexual orientation, all of these factors that could lead people to reach out and try to find people that like. So, I worry about losing the promise of the internet, even as we are burdened with all of its current problems.
Yeah. And, losing some of the kind of trial by error, I guess, that, you talked about when you were a young AOL user all those years ago. That idea of, I guess, predetermining what certain age groups of internet users see kind of links to the second part of the Discord announcement, which was its unveiling of a new teen council that it's going to be putting together over the coming months, which will be 10 to 12 teens who use Discord and who will shape the platform's policies, I guess give kind of color to the idea of their involvement in the platform, what they need, how they build connections on the platform, what is it that they are looking for in the future. I have reservations about this teen council approach and some of the council structures that some of the platforms build more generally, Blake. They feel a bit like kind of icing sugar. They feel fairly decorative in terms of their work. We see a lot of the same people on some of the same, on different councils, in fact. And it feels like something that people, as you say, are able to do a press release about and then somewhat move on. Where do you see these councils as a kind of response to some of the challenges we face nowadays?
Yes, I mean, I think that they are this gesture that platforms make towards more distributed, more representative, more fair decision making. It's not just us, just our bottom line. Instead, we're listening, we hear you, we care. And, none better than Meta at doing this, but most platforms have some version of this. And you're absolutely right that the same people or NGOs, especially as you get bigger, appear on the same consultative organizations. And a lot of them come out afterwards reporting quite critically of their experience, speaking into the void, not having meaningful voice. And Discord has a history of creating these other initiatives for teens. They used to have a program to help train teen moderators that was really interesting and impactful for the people involved, but also it was short-lived. There's no promise for how long it lasts or what the outcomes are or how that might change when public attention focuses on something different.
Yeah, really interesting. I would love to be able to do a bit of analysis on that, because I think that those council structures often get referred to by platforms but then kind of evaporate in ways that we don't always understand. Another part of the Safer Internet Day announcements, Blake, was one from the UK government, which I thought we could talk about a little bit before we shift gears. And that was a piece of research and actually a new advert that the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology have put out. The research is fascinating because it talks about the lack of conversations that parents are having with their children, which I guess is, somewhat leads to age assurance and age verification being prescribed as the answer. But they did a survey with 1,100 parents with children between the ages of 18 and 14. And interestingly, over 50% of them had never had a conversation with their children about their online experiences. And those who had conversations reported that it was one-off or infrequent. So Mike and I often talk on the podcast about how it's important for parents to engage in these conversations. There is a responsibility to do so. He has experience of some of those conversations with his children. I do not, I will say that. But, that was a number that was higher than I thought. And the advert that they have put out in kind of tandem with that encourages parents to have conversations, which I think is really interesting because there is this regulatory push that is obviously directed towards platforms. So here you have an initiative that is essentially kind of government approved, government funded, that is actually targeting parents to, I guess, have conversations that they don't already. What did you make of that small, not very representative piece of research, I would say, but still interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it felt surprising to me. I'm not as much into the parent and youth research angle, so I'm sure some of my wiser colleagues would be like, yes, obviously, we anticipated this. But I think for the public, given that there's so much media attention and parents expressing concern to the press, to their legislators, really calling for and endorsing these bans, that there's all of this outward directed talk about social media and seemingly very little in-person talk, in-family talk. It seems like a real disconnect.
Yeah, and it goes back to the very popular Adolescence series, which I'm not sure if you've seen. It's on Netflix here in the UK, caused a lot of discussion towards the back end of last year and essentially characterized a young teenage boy who went to his bedroom. We weren't kind of shown what it was he did, but was never talking to his parents about what he was seeing online, and then ended up committing a murder of a school friend. And so I do kind of welcome this idea that parents are responsible and should be having these conversations. That there is no single silver bullet on these topics, and everything is, parents have a responsibility to play alongside platforms. So very interesting to see the UK government using Safe Internet Day as a way of announcing that and launching that. Let's move on now, Blake. We've talked a bit about Discord preempting regulatory measures. Our next story is one in which a platform is potentially a little bit too late on that process. It's an announcement that came just after we launched last week's podcast, an announcement from the European Commission related to TikTok. And I want to take you back to 2024, February, almost exactly 2 years ago, before this podcast even existed, when it was a kind of mere twinkle in the eye of Mike and I. We hadn't even released an episode, but the EU announced a kind of multi-pronged investigation into TikTok, including about its addictive design patterns. And this week it found the Chinese platform in breach of that aspect of the investigation. Other aspects are still ongoing. And it's interesting because it's the first time that there's been a kind of legal standard set about addictive design in the world. All the other kind of platform regulation that we've been talking about on the podcast has never really touched on addictive design in this way. And, I want to explain why that makes me feel a bit weird, to be honest, but I want to kind of give a bit more detail first. So first of all, the Commission found that TikTok didn't adequately assess how features on its platform could impact some of its user behavior, and particularly users' physical or mental well-being, which is a direct quote from the announcement. So that's a really interesting point to note. Physical and mental well-being. We'll come back as to how they might have figured that out. And it pointed to a couple of different aspects of TikTok design, primarily the auto scroll, the famous auto scroll, that if you are a TikTok user yourself, or if you look at anybody using TikTok, is the kind of surefire sign that they are on that app. Quick fire, almost RSI inducing scrolling that goes on. And the Commission say that this in itself, and these are quite big words, lead to compulsive behavior and, quote, reduced user control, which again, I would love to know what you think about this, Blake, and how the Commission kind of got to this place. Secondly, it also came to the conclusion that screen time and parental controls were ineffective and easy to dismiss, which, again, we've talked a lot about on the podcast, the effectiveness of parental controls. And so it's very interesting, potentially kind of industry defining that some of the platform parental controls that TikTok have are not up to scratch. And all in all, this led to the recommendation from Henna Virkkunen, who's the EU tech chief, that TikTok changes its design in a number of ways over the coming years, that it disables infinite scroll that it's so famous for, that it builds in screen breaks, that it adapts its recommender system, which was a kind of small part of the announcement. And I want to kind of zoom in on that. So yeah, people might think, yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm addicted to TikTok, or I know people who are. The EU spokesperson actually mentioned that 7% of 12 to 15-year-olds spend 4 to 5 hours a day on TikTok, which is a shocking number. And in that context, and with everything we know that's happening in the world about the push to protect children online, it does make sense to go after TikTok for this. However, I have mixed feelings. I think it should be the case that product design is targeted by regulators. Safety is an important kind of design choice. There are ways that you can build safety in. Design matters in that. If you create streaks on a platform app, if you create rewards, they shape behaviors and they create incentives, right? We all know that at this point. And so the idea that platforms should be responsible for this, I think, is right. And I welcomed the age-appropriate design code from a few years ago in the UK, which led to the California one. I think that was a good direction we went in. However, I don't love the idea that we label all semi-engaging features on a platform as quote unquote addictive. The idea of infinite scroll or autoplay or push notifications or any kind of recommender algorithm being addictive, I think fails to have any kind of nuance in the discussion. So if we do regulate product, I think which I think we should, we need to do so in a way that differentiates between what is manipulative and, what is helpful and engaging. And so, Blake, I'm kind of stuck. I'm stuck with, wanting my cake and eating it here. Help me figure out where my argument goes wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm with you on the mixed feelings as well. And part of the challenge is translating these values that people care about, safety in particular here, into design. There is not consensus around what that means, from academics to policymakers to different platform ideas. And so you get really common sense ideas like we should care about this, we are invested in safety, there are problems here, but the design implications for that are not clear. And so I think that lack of clarity also comes up in the internet reaction to this announcement, where a lot of internet commentators note that these features that TikTok is being criticized for are really ubiquitous. They're not TikTok exclusives, even though people sometimes talk as if TikTok is the only algorithm, the only platform with an algorithm in the world. The infinite feeds, the recommendation systems are a common part of web, apps, internet, kind of hard to escape anywhere.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking that news websites, which I'm most familiar with, have all of the different features that the Commission have listed as potentially contributing to addictive design. Many homepages have infinite scroll, many autoplay videos. There is push notifications in every single app to the point of kind of distraction. And recommender systems are increasingly being built into news apps to help people find the content they want. So that suggests that in and of itself, those aren't features that are addictive, which is where I think the recommender systems come back in, or the algorithmic element to it. TikTok was kind of famous for moving from a kind of social graph to a topic graph, right? Not really caring who you were connected to, but just kind of profiling you in such a way that you could be served other content. And there's been some really great digging into its algorithm to figure out kind of what those profiles, what those personas, what those segments kind of are and look a bit like. The Commission's judgment doesn't say anything about any of that, Blake. The thing that might be the smoking gun, or that you could argue is the big differentiator when it comes to TikTok versus the other big platforms, isn't discussed at all. And as you say, there's no mention of YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels or features on other platforms that fall into the same bucket as infinite scroll. So in that context, do we think that this is a targeted announcement for a particular moment in time when we know there's lots going on in the world around TikTok? Is there a kind of political potential element to it?
Yeah, I think that makes more sense as an explanation than the inherent design features. It's hard to know the data that they're drawing these conclusions from because we will have to wait to have access to any of that. TikTok now can get access to it to appeal the process. But I guess maybe I'm too much in media history land, but I think even beyond social media, these concerns with autoplay remind me of Flow TV, broadcast television, always on channels that you could scroll through, always there for you. And the concerns that people had around that as addictive. And the way that got algorithmically reinterpreted with Netflix and binge watching has a lot of the same kind of addictive concerns and same technologies behind it, even if you're on long form versus short form video. And so it's just really hard to square these concerns with the rest of not only social media environment, but broader digital media apps platforms.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's potentially very, very wide-ranging judgment. Obviously, TikTok are going to appeal this. They've said that the kind of claims made by the EU Commission are categorically false, and they will obviously appeal that. I don't think you'll get to the point where TikTok have to pay a 6% fine of their global revenue. I don't think that's likely at all. But it is interesting for the fact that this is a kind of line in the sand when it comes to product design in a way that we really haven't seen at all before. And yeah, I really don't want Netflix's recommender system to go away, Blake, because it's already very hard to find stuff that I want to watch. So I have a skin in the game in that sense as well. I will flag just, which I think is a kind of a small step away from this topic, is a really interesting discussion on the Ezra Klein show, which we'll link in the show notes as well, between Ezra Klein, who's a journalist at the New York Times, and also two very interesting thinkers when it comes to the internet, Tim Wu and Cory Doctorow, both authors. Tim Wu, a legal scholar, worked in the Biden administration. And, they talk a lot about in this podcast product design choices that are made, and the fact that this causes kind of lock-in and behaviors actually that kind of allude to what the EU Commission, I think, has tried to do here, but not got around to. So the European Commission might want to go to Cory and Tim for a bit of a better way to explain some of what they think they're trying to do, because that is a great podcast and worth listening to. Blake, let's do our best to go through the rest of the stories we picked today in a fairly timely manner. We will start by talking about a story that you somehow plucked from Hungarian media in what has to be one of the best finds for a story on Ctrl-Alt-Speech that they've ever seen. Tell me how you came across this story about Meta's political advertising ban holes, and what led you to be reading Hungarian media?
So I feel a bit rude because I know that I encountered this through my own social networks. Probably someone on my LinkedIn, but I don't remember who it was that posted it to give them proper credit. And then when I went to read more about the story, I found like there really was one English language article on it. But I thought it was a really interesting topic. So right now, Hungary is in the lead up to their parliamentary elections. Those will take place on the 12th of April. And Political Capital Policy Research and Consulting Institute did an investigation to look into the use of political advertisements on Meta. And that's a contentious topic because Meta announced that they would not be allowing political advertisements within the European Union since October 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And Hungary has long been one of the number one users of Meta political advertisements. Viktor Orban has been a major spender here, and the country in the 3 months leading up to the ban had spent more than Germany on ads on Meta, despite Germany having 8 times the population.
Good Lord.
And it found that, I guess the spend is down, but it's not non-existent. 14 candidates have ads in Meta's ad repository. A few of the ads have been flagged as political and restricted, but over 150 were allowed and still active. And so it raises concerns about the enforcement of this policy and also what is going on in terms of elections in Hungary.
Indeed. I mean, I'd be surprised if this wasn't happening in other countries as well in Europe, where obviously the ban is in place, but probably enforcement isn't as strong as we expect it to. I mean, this is probably, as you say, an enforcement issue. It's probably not Meta seeking to profit from this. I don't think there's huge reasons to be allowing 150 ads through. I don't think the kind of spend on those will be so strong there. So people may claim that there's something kind of not quite right here. It's probably just the fact that this is a fairly underrepresented European language and a country that doesn't get a lot of probably attention within Meta, but really, really interesting. I think the way that ad policies are enforced is a fascinating topic, particularly on these massive platforms. I remember, I think it was the back end of last year where Reuters did a really fascinating piece of research about fraudulent advertising on Meta and found that so much of the spend, millions and millions of dollars worth of spend, was essentially kind of fraudulent ads that violated their policies. And so we can't underestimate the scale that this is happening at. But when it has the potential to shift elections and get people out to vote or stop them from voting, it does take on a new importance, doesn't it?
And I think it also shows the importance of the little bits of data access we do have to platforms. So shout out to Meta's ad repository and journalists and civil society organizations that make use of it to engage these accountability efforts.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always worried about the kind of ad repository being taken away in a kind of peak of anger. That would be a bad thing, wouldn't it? Thanks so much there, Blake. A story that I wanted to talk about, which we've touched a bit on Ctrl-Alt-Speech, is Claude's constitution, the very long 20,000 plus word love letter almost to Claude. And the constitution is kind of interesting because it's a new way of trying to implement safety rules within the Claude platform. The old kind of way of doing things that worked for the major platforms, having kind of very strict rules and very clear policies, clearly is going to come up against some problems in a world where anybody can ask LLMs anything. And so the Claude Constitution is a new way of doing that. It's been talked about as Claude's soul. And we talked a bit about the originator of that document, explaining a bit about how it worked on a New York Times podcast a few weeks ago. The piece I want to talk about is an op-ed by a oversight board member who's given a bit of a critical view on the Constitution. Suzanne Nossel is the former CEO of PEN America, and she has called for the Constitution to have a Bill of Rights alongside the Constitution itself, in which users are given a clear sense of what the remedies are and what reviews look like. Very interestingly calls out the fact that there is no mention of what happens if this Constitution goes wrong or takes a turn. And it's a very clear-eyed assessment of the Constitution at a time when I think lots of people were quite excited by it, potentially a bit misty-eyed about it, maybe thinking it's the new way forward. There's always a sense of that, I think, when something new and sparkly happens. But Suzanne kind of is very eloquent in talking about how it feels like not dissimilar to the early days of Silicon Valley, when platforms talked about connecting the world and providing kind of human knowledge to all corners of the globe, but were then criticized for the fact that their judgments were made from a very small pocket of individuals in Silicon Valley. And she kind of equates the two, says that this is an interesting approach, but there are some improvements that can be made. Blake, what did you think about this piece, and what have you made of the kind of constitution discussion more generally?
I mean, I think the warring metaphors here between the Facebook Oversight Board and the Anthropic Constitution are quite fun. And also really different. Like Constitution and Oversight Board have a lot of affiliation, but the way that it's implemented, they're really different ideas about governance and ethics. So Anthropic is trying to do this deontological, or no, I'm getting my philosophy wrong, it's been a while, doing a virtue ethics approach. How do you cultivate the good bot baby? Whereas Meta's Oversight Board is much more kind of classic liberal tradition. It is rights, it is oversight, it is process. And the op-ed is very much in line with that. And so I think like the criticism of this as constitution, not the only one making this, but it's a good one. It doesn't function the way that we have thought constitutions do. Or if it is, it's a constitution addressing Claude itself as an entity, not the world using and interacting with it. It's not for the users in the same way.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. I hadn't thought about the kind of people behind both the Constitution and the Oversight Board almost being, in different camps in many ways. The person who originated the Constitution is a philosopher by training, and therefore, approaches some of these ideas and these challenges differently. Everyone on the Oversight Board is an academic of law or professor of something or very highly regarded journalist or human rights practitioner. And so, yeah, you're quite right that there's some kind of clash in values there, which you kind of read between the lines in a way that I didn't, which is really interesting. Out of interest, do you use Claude? Like, what is your preferred AI system? How do you kind of base where you spend your time? What choice of system do you use?
I'm so uninteresting on this topic. I use very little AI. I use Microsoft Copilot, which we have licensed through the university to do translation work. And that's it.
Really?
Mostly because I'm learning Danish. I'm doing my best, but I'm not literate. And Copilot does help me navigate that, but that's about the extent. How about you?
Amazing. That's probably where I'd want to be in terms of AI usage, to be honest. But I use a couple of different systems. I use ChatGPT, but I'm increasingly kind of drawn to Anthropic's approach when it comes to safety, and it's the way it's set itself up as, I guess, the frontier model that cares most about safety. And so I'm very interested in these kind of meta discussions about whether it is doing what it says it is, whether it has the values that it claims it does. And, they've invested a lot of money in marketing recently, which many people have seen around the Super Bowl. They aren't going down a route of advertising in the way that OpenAI and ChatGPT are. So it is, those tensions will always kind of come up against each other, I think. Very interesting. Let's finish off, Blake, today with a research paper. Very apt, seeing as you are in the research space. You brought to Ctrl-Alt-Speech a paper that was about debanking adult industry workers in Canada, which is a fascinating topic.
Yeah, so this is a new report done by two researchers associated with ECP, or Ethical Capital Partners. And so that's the kind of financial group that owns ALO, which people probably know better by Pornhub, which it operates. And so researchers who have independence from the organization, but it's an organization with a particular agenda and interests. And the report deals with the experience of adult content creators and other people working in adult industries, access to financial services, and looking at the policies around access. The report looks at the phenomenon of dip banking. So what happens when someone is refused banking procedures or services or has their accounts closed? Sometimes this directly involves digital platforms. So things like, what do you use for money? It's mobile pay in Denmark, but I'm trying to think of like other one. But any of your electronic wallets, wow. are things that, could be closed on you in an instance. And we see these concerns around access to finance, whether for individual creators who are speaking and making content, or for entire platforms. So it made me think of the uproar last year around the influence that credit card companies were having over the policies of Steam, or what kinds of games can we make or circulate, and how can people rise up or push back against that, calling and pressuring to create more protections here for promoting particular kinds of speech. Sometimes it's politically extreme speech, sometimes it's adult speech, but I think that the report draws attention to the role of finance and bank as part of our platform governance conversation and content moderation.
Yeah, it's a really good call out. I think there's not something we actually cover enough, I think, on Ctrl-Alt-Speech. So I'm really glad you brought this here. It reminds me of the FT podcast Hot Money. I'm not sure if you've listened to that, but it's a really interesting series about the porn industry and the way that some of these financial institutions are involved in the process of kind of allowing certain porn sites to exist on the internet and therefore allow creators to make a living. And when those financial institutions suddenly change tack, which they can do, it's their right to do so, that causes a massive kind of downstream effect. And so, even listening to that podcast, I was kind of shocked as to the centrality of those financial institutions. And I think this research talks to that as well. So yeah, great flag for listeners, really interesting read for listeners over the next week. Not sure we had a porn bingo card slot, but, if we might have to add on in the future for future episodes. Blake, that brings us to the end of today's episode. I'm very, very grateful for you today. Thanks you for bringing all those amazing stories to us. I hope you enjoyed it.
Absolutely did. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, promise Blake wasn't coerced into it at all. She volunteered to be on the podcast, I promise. If you'd like to be on the podcast, if you want to kind of put yourself forward, we'd love to have people like Blake who are working in the industry, doing amazing research, doing amazing work, co-host the episodes from time to time. Get in touch with us at podcast@Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. We're always looking for interesting co-hosts. And like I said, please do like, review, and rate the podcast wherever you can. It's massively helpful for us. And with that, I bid you farewell. Thank you, Blake, and we'll catch everyone next week. Take care.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Ctrl-Alt-Speech. Subscribe now to get our weekly episodes as soon as they're released. If your company or organization is interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact us by visiting Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. That's Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com.